This is my true story. I worked my whole life so my son could live better than I ever did. I gave him my land, my business, my name, everything I built with my bare hands. I thought when I got old, he would take care of me the way I once cared for him. But one morning, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You have no power anymore. You are just old and useless, man." Those words hit harder than age itself. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just smiled, because I knew one call could change everything. Before I tell you, comment where you're watching from and subscribe so my story reaches more people. I built his world from nothing. When I was young, I didn't have rich parents or lucky breaks. I had calloused hands, long nights, and a dream to build something that would last. I started small. One shop, one machine, one worker. I slept in my workshop most nights, eating leftovers and saving every coin I could. I told myself I was doing it for the future, for the son I hoped would never know hunger the way I did. When he was born, everything I did revolved around him. I carried him to the factory when he was a baby, rocked him to sleep in my arms during breaks, and kept his photo on my desk as my only reminder of why I couldn't stop. Every deal I made, every hour I worked, was so he would never struggle the way I did. The business grew fast. From one shop, it became a company. From one worker, a team of 50. People started calling me sir, but I never felt like one. I was just a father trying to build something strong enough to protect his family. My son grew up watching me work, watching me give everything. I thought he understood what it took. I thought he saw the sweat and the sacrifice behind every brick. When he turned 21, I started training him. I taught him how to speak to clients, how to read a contract, how to handle pressure without breaking. He was smart, quick, and confident. Maybe too confident. The world came easy to him because I had already done the hard part. I gave him the car he drove, the office he worked in, the company name he took pride in. He started taking charge, signing deals, running meetings. I was proud. I told people my son would take the company to new heights. I stepped back a little, thinking it was time to rest. I thought he'd handle things with care, with respect, the same way I did. But slowly, I noticed changes. The way he spoke to workers became colder. The way he handled money became careless. He started acting like everything was his, the land, the office, the company. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself he was young, that mistakes were part of growing up. I didn't want to embarrass him in front of clients or employees. I let him lead, hoping one day he'd realize leadership wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. As months passed, he became distant. He stopped visiting home. He started spending money on things that didn't matter. Luxury cars, parties, expensive suits. Things that looked powerful, but meant nothing. The company was still strong, but I could see cracks forming. In his attitude, in his character, in the way he treated people who once helped him. Even then, I didn't interfere. I wanted him to learn on his own, but I also made sure the foundation of everything stayed under my control. The documents, the ownership, the rights, all still carried my name. It wasn't about distrust, it was about protection, the same protection a father builds when he knows what the world can do to people who forget where they came from. He started calling me old-fashioned. He said I didn't understand modern business. I smiled and let him talk. I didn't argue, because I knew something he didn't. Time always reveals who truly built the empire. Every empire has two types of men, the one who builds it and the one who takes credit for it. I was the first. He thought he was the second. But I never built a house without keeping the master key. He was too blinded by pride to see that I never gave up control. The name on the door might have been his, but the signature on every document was mine. I didn't raise him to be my rival, but he was slowly turning into one, and he didn't even realize that his entire world still rested on my single decision. I gave him everything he had, but what I didn't give him, and what he didn't earn, was respect. That he would have to learn the hard way. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The office smelled of coffee and fresh paper, just like it always did. I walked into the meeting room to find him sitting at the head of the table. My seat, the one I'd sat in for 40 years. He didn't even look up when I entered. His phone was in his hand, his shoes on my desk. The board members were already there, silent, waiting. I could feel the tension. The meeting began, and we discussed company numbers. He interrupted me several times, cutting off my sentences as if my words didn't matter. I tried to stay calm. I told him to be patient, to think carefully before making changes that could risk the company. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and smiled. That cold, young smile that comes from pride, not strength. Then he said it. The sentence that split the air like a blade. "You have no power anymore, old man." The room went dead silent. No one dared move. I stared at him, trying to understand if I heard him right. He didn't flinch. He didn't take it back. He just smirked, like he had finally defeated me. He stood up, walked around the table, and added, "You built this place, but I run it now. You're just a name on the wall." Those words didn't just hurt, they stripped something away. I had faced failures, debts, betrayal, even poverty before, but nothing had ever hit me like hearing my own son say those words. My chest tightened, but my face stayed calm. I didn't want him to see my anger. The board members avoided my eyes. Some of them had known me since I was young. They looked ashamed, but no one spoke. They were scared of him, scared of the man I raised to be fearless. I sat back in my chair, slowly, silently. I looked at him, the boy I once carried on my shoulders when he was too small to reach the counter, the boy I taught to tie his first tie, the boy I stayed awake for during his college exams. Now that same boy stood there, speaking to me like I was nothing but a forgotten piece of history. But inside me, something didn't break. Something woke up. A quiet, sharp, patient part of me that I hadn't used in years. I didn't shout or fight back. I just nodded once, stood up, and buttoned my coat. "Then I guess my work here is done," I said quietly. He laughed, not kindly, but with satisfaction. "Finally," he replied. I walked toward the door while he called out behind me, "You can go home now. Enjoy your retirement." His wife laughed softly from the corner of the room. I didn't look back. I just kept walking. When I stepped outside the office building, the air felt different, lighter. For years, I had been holding the company together, guiding him through every storm. Now he thought he had won by pushing me out. He didn't realize I was leaving him exactly where I wanted him, in control, but blind. Because true power doesn't shout. It doesn't need to sit at the head of a table. It hides quietly in signatures, in documents, in small details only the builder remembers. And as I walked down those marble steps, I already knew what I was going to do next. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. He thought he'd taken my crown. He didn't realize I still owned the throne. When I left that meeting room, I turned once to look back through the glass wall. He was sitting in my old chair, the one I bought the year the company opened, the one that had supported my back through sleepless nights and hard years. He leaned back in it like a king on a throne, his legs crossed, his hands behind his head, a grin stretching across his face. I could read that expression without a single word. It was arrogance, the kind that comes from someone who's never had to earn anything. He thought the battle was over. He thought he had taken everything from me, the company, the title, the respect. His wife stood behind him, smiling proudly, like she'd won a prize. They looked at each other with that smug confidence people wear when they think the world now belongs to them. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, not out of joy, but because I finally understood who he had become. The man in that chair wasn't my son anymore. He was a stranger, wearing my last name. I walked through the office hallway slowly, taking in every detail. The walls I painted, the photos I hung, the employees I hired. People avoided my eyes as I passed. Some looked sad, some nervous. They knew what had happened inside that room, but they also knew something my son didn't, that I never lost quietly. When I stepped outside, I could still see his reflection through the window. He was pouring himself a drink, laughing with his wife, celebrating his victory. He didn't realize that arrogance is a warning sign. The moment a man thinks he's untouchable, he's already standing at the edge of a fall. I got into my car and sat there for a few minutes, hands on the wheel, staring ahead. My heart was calm. No anger, no regret, just silence. The kind of silence that builds before a storm. I wasn't going to fight him with words. I didn't need to. I had something far stronger, knowledge. He thought because I stepped back, I was powerless. But I built that company from the ground up. I knew every account, every partner, every secret deal. I knew the cracks he didn't see, the rules he ignored, the signatures that still carried my authority. He thought the paperwork was just old files. He never looked closely enough to realize that power doesn't disappear when you stop talking. It disappears when you stop paying attention. I started the car and drove home slowly. My mind was clear. For years, I had trusted him to take care of what I built. But now, I saw the truth. He wasn't protecting the family name. He was burying it under his pride. That night, I took out a small box from my desk drawer. Inside were old photographs of me, my wife, and him as a little boy. One picture showed him sitting on my lap at the office desk, pretending to sign papers with a crayon. I smiled at that photo. Back then, he didn't understand what those papers meant. He just liked the sound of authority. I guess that part never changed. I placed the photo aside and pulled out an envelope filled with legal documents. I read every line slowly. My name was still there, printed in black ink. Co-owner, founder, and chief trustee. His name came second. Every account, every asset, every transaction required my approval. He had power only because I allowed it. I closed the envelope, leaned back in my chair, and looked around my quiet home. It wasn't defeat I felt, it was realization. He thought he had won a war that hadn't even begun. As I poured myself a glass of water, I whispered under my breath, "Enjoy the chair while you can, son. You may sit in it, but you'll never own it." Then I smiled again, a real smile this time, because I already knew how this story would end. He never paid attention to details. That was always his weakness. He liked big moments, big deals, big meetings, big speeches. He thought power was about being seen, not about knowing. He forgot that the strength of a company lies not in who speaks the loudest, but in who signs the papers. And the one who signs last is the one who truly owns everything. I built every system inside that business myself. Every account, every department, every rule was designed to pass through me. When I made him a partner, I didn't just hand him control. I created safety locks, things only I could open or close. Every major decision, every transaction above a certain amount still required my signature. Every loan, every investment, every property purchase, all had my approval line quietly printed beside his. He didn't read them. He never checked. He was too busy showing off the title CEO on his office door. He thought that made him untouchable. He forgot that behind every empire is paperwork, and behind every signature is power. Over the years, he replaced people who had been with me since the beginning. Loyal men and women who understood how I worked, how I protected everything. But even then, they never stopped reporting to me. They sent copies of the accounts, reports of the transactions, and even recordings of meetings. Not because I asked them to spy, but because loyalty can't be erased by arrogance. They had seen me build that company from dust. They weren't going to let pride destroy it. So when my son started shifting money to risky ventures, they informed me quietly. When he began closing long-term partnerships just to impress new investors, I knew before the papers were even filed. I didn't interfere then. I wanted him to believe he was in control. It's easy to lose balance when you think the ground beneath you is solid. He didn't realize that all his success still lived under my name. The properties he bragged about buying were technically owned by the parent company, the one registered under my authority. The luxury office he called his was still tied to my trust fund. He could move numbers on a screen, but he couldn't move the foundation beneath them. Sometimes I would walk through the old files late at night. I'd read contracts, bank statements, and ownership clauses, reminding myself that every word written there was proof of my foresight. He might have had the crown, but I still held the pen. He loved to talk about expansion. He'd tell people how he was planning to take the company global. What he didn't know was that every international deal was backed by my guarantee. If I withdrew it, every contract would fall apart instantly. He built castles in the air, but I owned the ground they floated on. It's strange how arrogance blinds people. He thought stepping into my chair meant inheriting my wisdom. But wisdom isn't a seat, it's memory. And I remembered everything. The bank accounts, the passwords, the contacts, even the private line of our lawyer, who had been with me since the beginning. That night, I took out the original partnership document. It had 2 signatures, mine and his. I ran my finger over the ink. My name was written in steady lines, his in sharp strokes. I smiled faintly. "You built your power on this," I whispered. "But this still belongs to me." He forgot one important rule in business. Never turn against the man who built the walls around you. Because when he removes a single brick, everything collapses. He thought I was an old man with fading strength. He didn't realize I was the architect of the system that held his success together. He believed I had no power left. But power isn't noise, it's quiet, buried in paper, waiting for the right moment to surface. And that moment had finally arrived. That night, the house was quiet. The city outside was asleep, but my mind was wide awake. I sat at my old wooden desk, the same one I bought when the company first started. The light from the small lamp fell across the stack of documents in front of me. My reading glasses rested beside them, and my phone lay face down on the table. I stared at it for a long time. It was the same phone that once rang with opportunity. Business calls, contracts, new deals, investors. But tonight, it was going to ring for something different, something final. I took a deep breath and turned the phone over. My contact list was short, just names that still meant something. And right there, near the top, was one name I had trusted all my life. Mr. John, my lawyer of 40 years. He had been there since the beginning, through every deal, every signature, every battle. He knew the company inside and out, just like I did. I pressed call. He answered almost immediately, his voice tired but steady. "Sir? It's late. Is everything all right?" "Yes," I said softly. "Everything's finally clear." He didn't ask what I meant. He'd heard that tone before, the one I used when I was about to make a decision that couldn't be undone. "I need you to start the process," I said. "Freeze every account. Transfer every active asset into the holding company. Block his access. Effective immediately." There was a pause. "Are you sure, sir? That will shut everything down." "I'm sure," I replied. "It's time he learns what power really means." He didn't argue. "Consider it done, sir," he said. When the call ended, I sat there in silence, listening to the faint ticking of the wall clock. It was 11:47 p.m. In less than an hour, everything he thought he controlled would be gone. Quietly, legally, completely. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the room. On the shelf sat old trophies, photos from the factory's first days, and a framed picture of my wife holding our son when he was just a baby. I smiled at that picture. Back then, I used to dream of this boy growing into a good man, kind, grateful, respectful. Somewhere along the line, success had taken that boy and turned him into someone else. I didn't blame him entirely. Maybe I made it too easy. Maybe I gave him everything too soon. But the moment he told me I had no power anymore, I realized it was time to remind him that power isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn. I walked to the window and looked out into the dark street. The air was cold, the wind soft. The same city lights that once symbolized growth now felt meaningless. For years, I stayed quiet to keep peace. But peace without respect is just weakness in disguise. And I was done being weak. The phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Mr. John. "All accounts frozen. Transfers initiated. Access revoked. It's done." I put the phone down slowly. My heartbeat didn't rise. My hands didn't shake. I just felt calm. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. I was leading again, not the company, but my own dignity. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark for a few minutes. I could almost hear his voice in my head, laughing, saying I had no control. I smiled faintly. "You'll find out in the morning," I whispered. Before going to bed, I wrote a short note on a piece of paper and left it on my desk. It said only 6 words. "Power never leaves the one who built." Then I closed my eyes and slept peacefully, deeper than I had in years. Because the next sunrise wasn't just the start of a new day. It was the beginning of his lesson. The next morning began like any other. The sun rose quietly, the air felt calm, and the world seemed normal. For everyone except my son. By the time I finished my tea, the first call had already come through. It wasn't from him, it was from one of his managers, panicked and confused. "Sir, all accounts are locked. We can't make any transactions." I said nothing. I simply thanked him for informing me and hung up. 10 minutes later, another call came, this time from his secretary. "Sir, your son can't access the business login. The system says authorization revoked." I smiled to myself and set the phone aside. The storm had started. By 9 a.m., I knew chaos had reached his office. He had built his confidence around control, and now he had none. His credit cards stopped working. His company accounts froze. His private line buzzed non-stop with calls from angry investors demanding answers. Every partnership he had bragged about was now collapsing like dominoes. Without money moving, the empire he thought he owned couldn't even pay its own employees. He stormed into my house around noon. I heard his car screech into the driveway before the horn blared twice. He didn't knock. He kicked the door open and shouted my name. I sat at the dining table, calm, my morning paper still open in front of me. "What did you do?" he screamed. His voice cracked, the same voice that once said I had no power. "You shut everything down." I looked up from my newspaper, met his eyes, and said quietly, "I reminded the world who still owns the ground beneath your empire." He froze. For a second his anger faltered. He didn't know what to say. He looked around the room, his eyes darting from the walls to the old photos, searching for something to blame. Then he shouted again, "You can't do this. It's my company." I folded the paper neatly and stood up. "It was never yours," I said. "You just forgot whose name built it." He clenched his fists, pacing like a cornered man. His wife followed behind him, looking scared for the first time. She had been his loudest supporter, the one who pushed him to take full control. Now she stood silently, watching the foundation crumble. I poured myself another cup of tea and sat down again, calm as the storm raged around me. He shouted, cursed, and threatened to call his lawyer. I smiled. "Call him," I said. "He works for me." He stopped talking. His face turned pale. He realized in that moment that every move he tried to make would circle back to me, because I hadn't just built a company, I had built the walls around his world. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the frame shook. His car sped away, tires screeching down the road. But I knew he had nowhere to go. Every account, every connection, every deal still tied back to me. By evening, more calls came in. Partners backed out. Investors withdrew. Employees started resigning. The news spread that the founder, me, had taken back full control. Within 24 hours, the company's name was back under my authority. That night, I sat on the same porch where I used to hold him as a child. The air was cool, the stars faint. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sadness either. What I felt was balance, the kind that returns when justice finally finds its way home. He called me again at midnight, his voice small and broken. "Dad, please, I don't know what to do." I didn't answer. Not yet. Silence was still teaching him what words never could. As I set the phone down, I looked at the old photo of my wife on the shelf. "He said I had no power left," I whispered, "but power never leaves the man who built it with his hands." And as the night deepened, I finally felt peace, not from revenge, but from knowing that truth had done my work for me. By the end of that week, his world collapsed faster than I ever imagined. The empire he bragged about, the one he said I had no control over, crumbled piece by piece. The first hit came when the investors pulled out. Without access to company accounts, they saw no reason to stay. The contracts he'd been celebrating days earlier were canceled overnight. Suppliers stopped shipping. Employees stopped showing up. Even the security guards outside his office didn't return after learning the company's funds were frozen. The silence in that building must have been deafening. I knew that silence well. the kind that comes when arrogance meets reality. He tried to fight back at first. He called emergency meetings, begged for extensions, promised people that it's just a technical error. But the truth always spreads faster than denial. Within 2 days, everyone knew the truth, that the founder had taken back control, and the son who called him powerless had no authority left. His phone stopped ringing after that. No one wanted to be associated with him. Clients backed away. The news leaked to local papers. Company founder reclaims ownership after family dispute. It wasn't a scandal, but it was enough to make him look weak. And for someone who lived off reputation, that was worse than bankruptcy. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel proud. I just watched quietly as life did what pride never allows, correct itself. He sold his car first, then his wife's jewelry. His mansion, the one he bought under the company's name, was repossessed. The staff left, the lights went out, and the silence followed him everywhere. His wife left too, took her bags and walked out one evening without saying goodbye. She had married power, not the man. When the power vanished, so did she. He came to my house one evening. No car this time, no confidence either. He stood outside for a long time before knocking. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize him. His face looked older, tired, beaten. The expensive suits were gone. He wore a wrinkled shirt, his hair unkempt, his eyes hollow. He didn't speak for a few seconds. When he finally did, his voice cracked. "Dad, I've lost everything." I looked at him and said nothing. He stared at the floor, ashamed, silent, waiting for me to say something, anything. I could see the guilt in his posture. The same hands that once pointed at me now trembled like a child's. He tried to explain, saying he never meant to disrespect me, that he was just under pressure. But I had heard enough excuses in my lifetime to know the difference between regret and fear. He wasn't sorry yet. He was scared. I told him to sit down. He hesitated, then obeyed. We sat across from each other at the same dining table where he once laughed at me for being too old-fashioned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind him of the words he'd said. I didn't have to. The world had already repeated them back to him louder than I ever could. He asked me if I could help him rebuild. I looked at him quietly and said, "The only thing worth rebuilding is yourself." He lowered his head. For the first time, I saw tears in his eyes. The proud man, who once told me I had no power, was now crying in the home he once avoided. That was the real fall. Not losing money, not losing a company, but losing the arrogance that blinded him from truth. I gave him food that night. We didn't speak much. When he left, I saw something in his walk I hadn't seen in years. Humility. It was small, fragile, but it was there. As I closed the door behind him, I whispered to myself, he thought power was money. Now he knows power is memory. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I slept without anger, because my silence had done what shouting never could. He came back 2 days later. No yelling this time, no arrogance, no pride. Just a quiet knock on the same door he once kicked open. I opened it slowly and found him standing there, exhausted, thinner, humbled. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes red, and his voice barely a whisper. "Dad," he said, "I need to talk." I let him in. He sat down at the table where everything had started, the same table where I once signed the papers that gave him control, and the same table that took it all back. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, but not angry, just tired. Finally, he looked up and said, "I was wrong." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. "I thought power meant being the loudest in the room. I thought I didn't need you anymore." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "But now I see I didn't build anything. I was just living off your work." He lowered his head again, tears falling quietly onto the table. I didn't stop him. Sometimes pain needs to spill before healing can begin. "I've lost everything," he said. "The company, the house, my wife. I don't even know who I am anymore." I looked at him. The boy who once ran barefoot across the factory floor, chasing me between machines. The boy who used to hold my hand and say he wanted to be just like Dad. Somewhere between success and pride, that boy had disappeared. But right now, I saw a glimpse of him again, not in his strength, but in his weakness. He whispered, "Please, help me start again." I stayed quiet for a long time, letting the moment sit. Then I said softly, "Son, power isn't something you take. It's something you remember." He looked confused. I continued, "You thought power came from control, money, titles. But real power comes from discipline, from loyalty, from respect. You had the keys to the castle, but you forgot who built the door." He wiped his tears, nodding slowly. "I know that now," he said. "I was blinded." I leaned back in my chair. "You thought I was powerless," I said. "But power doesn't leave the one who built the foundation. It just waits quietly, until the right time to remind everyone who started it all." He didn't argue. He just nodded again, ashamed. After a while, I stood up and poured him a glass of water. "Drink," I said. "You'll need your strength." He took it with shaky hands. I didn't promise to give him the company back. I didn't promise to fix his life. He didn't need that. What he needed was a lesson that would never fade. I told him to take a job, any honest job, and work his way up again. No help, no shortcuts, no family name. "Start as a worker," I said. "Feel the weight of every hour. Earn your respect, not just your paycheck." He agreed quietly. Before he left, he looked at me and said, "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. "No, son. I don't hate you, but I needed you to lose everything, so you could finally understand what you had." He stood at the door for a long time before walking away. He didn't slam it this time. He closed it gently, almost respectfully. As I watched him leave, I realized something. This wasn't his punishment. It was his beginning. Every man falls once in his life, but only the wise ones rise again with humility. That was his moment of truth. And mine was simple: to forgive him in silence, but never forget the words that started it all. "You have no power anymore." He would never say them again. Weeks passed, and the noise around his downfall faded. The papers stopped writing about it, the investors moved on, and life became quiet again. For both of us. I didn't see him much during that time, but I heard things. People said he was working at a small warehouse on the edge of town, taking orders, loading trucks, doing the kind of work most men overlook. The same kind of work that built his fortune in the first place. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought maybe it was just talk. But one morning, I drove there myself. I parked at a distance and watched through the open gate. And there he was, wearing plain clothes, his hands covered in grease, moving boxes beside the other workers. No assistants, no suits, no orders to give. He didn't see me, but I saw everything I needed to. The pride was gone from his walk. The arrogance was gone from his eyes. For the first time, my son looked like a man, not a shadow of one. I sat in the car for a long time, watching him. He worked without complaint, without the need to be seen. Every few minutes, he'd pause to wipe the sweat off his face. And though he looked tired, there was something peaceful about him, like he had finally stopped pretending to be more than he was. That day, I didn't speak to him. I didn't go inside. I just left quietly, letting him continue his work. Because some lessons are learned best in silence. A few weeks later, he showed up at my doorstep again, but this time there was no sadness, just calm. His clothes were still dirty from work, but he stood taller, more grounded. "I got a job," he said. "It's not much, but it's honest." I nodded slowly. He smiled, a real one, the kind I hadn't seen in years. "I'm learning again," he said. "I understand now what you were trying to teach me." I invited him in. We sat together quietly, drinking tea. No grand speeches, no apologies, no talk about the past. Just a father and son sitting side by side, two men who finally understood each other without needing to speak much. He told me he wanted to rebuild from the ground up. Not as my son, not as the owner's heir, but as a worker who earned every inch of progress with his own sweat. He said he wanted to make me proud again. I told him he already had, not because of what he achieved, but because of what he learned. Respect, humility, patience. Those were worth more than any company. That night, after he left, I sat by the window and thought about everything that had happened. How one sentence, "You have no power anymore," had set everything in motion. But it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about understanding. I hadn't destroyed his life. I had given him back the strength he lost when he forgot where he came from. People think power is control. It isn't. Power is responsibility. It's the ability to build, to guide, to protect. I had spent my whole life teaching him how to lead, but I forgot to teach him how to fall. Maybe that was my mistake. But in losing everything, he finally found what I wanted him to see all along. That respect lasts longer than any fortune. Now, when I visit the company office, people still call me sir, but it doesn't matter anymore. Titles fade. What matters is that my son knows who I am. Not as the man who punished him, but as the man who reminded him. He still works hard, still builds, still learns. And though the empire is smaller now, it's cleaner, stronger, honest. Built not on arrogance, but on gratitude. I didn't ruin him. I rebuilt him, quietly, patiently, as only a father can. Months have passed now, and peace finally lives in my house again. The company runs quietly under new management, smaller, simpler, and honest. I no longer sit behind a desk or sign papers every day. I spend my mornings walking in the garden, drinking tea, and watching the sun rise without worry. My phone doesn't ring with problems anymore. The world that once revolved around meetings and control now feels calm and clear. For the first time in many years, I am not a businessman. I am just a father, one who did what he had to do. Sometimes my son visits. He doesn't come in fancy cars anymore. He walks. He sits on the same porch where I used to sit alone after long factory shifts. We talk about simple things, the weather, the workers, the taste of the tea. No talk about power, money, or success. Just two men who finally understand that peace means more than pride. He often brings me groceries or fixes small things around the house, things he once thought were beneath him. And every time he does, I see something I thought I'd lost forever. Respect. Not forced, not demanded, but quiet, natural respect. He has started building again, slowly, not for show this time, but for purpose. He told me he saves a small part of every paycheck. He wants to rebuild the company someday, but not in my name, in his own, from scratch, with integrity. I told him that's the only kind of success worth chasing. Sometimes I think about that morning, the day he said, "You have no power anymore." Back then, it felt like a wound I'd never recover from. But now, looking back, I see it differently. Those words were a gift. They forced me to remember who I was before I became Dad the provider, Dad the banker, Dad the company. They reminded me that power doesn't fade with age. It transforms from control to wisdom, from command to patience. Real power doesn't shout. It doesn't need to prove itself. It signs, it decides, it waits. And when the moment comes, it acts quietly, without needing recognition. I never wanted to destroy him. I only wanted to wake him. Life did the rest. The same hands that built his empire also guided its fall, not out of anger, but love. Because sometimes, the only way to teach someone what power truly is to take it away until they see what's left. Now, when he leaves my house, he always says the same thing before walking out the door. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." And I always answer, "Just keep remembering." Because power is not about ownership, it's about memory. The one who remembers the effort behind the empire will never lose it again. He said I had no power anymore, but he was wrong. My power was never in my voice, my position, or my wealth. My power was in what I built, in what I taught, and in what I could take back when respect disappeared. That is the final truth. He tried to erase me from his success, so I reminded him who wrote the first signature on it.